Now, for those of you who like to fish in the state of Minnesota, this upcoming weekend, fishing opener is pretty much like our Super Bowl. Now, I know a lot of you are probably Vikings fans, and we don't get to celebrate a lot of Super Bowl victories or even playing in it a lot, but fishing opener is the Super Bowl that we get every single year, the weekend that we've all been waiting for, and this is when bass opens up, walleye opens up, pike, but specifically in this video we're going to be talking about walleye fishing, and we brought in Joel Nelson, who's an experienced walleye angler, to break down a few tips that you can utilize this opener to catch more walleyes. And a lot of these tips are actually going to be really applicable no matter where you're fishing, as long as it's during this springtime period. But hopefully you're able to pick up a few things in this video, and we're going to start off talking about springtime walleye location.
So much of walleye fishing during this time of year revolves around location. Sure, water temps are big. In a lot of years, you're going to have walleyes that can, in the northern part of the state, continue right up to the spawn as it opens, but I think spawn this year is probably going to be past. We're probably going to be fishing post-spawn walleyes. And when I think post-spawn walleyes, I think of those areas just off of where they were spawning. I think of kind of mid-level depths, anywhere from 6 feet on some lakes, 8, 10, 12, maybe even 14. And a lot of that depending on where you have emergent weed cover. Now, good weed growth, your cabbage, your coontail, all those desirable plants are going to hold walleyes that slip off that first break a little bit and spend their time resting. Now, in the extreme northern portions of the state of Minnesota and beyond, you're probably gonna have fish that are right up in 4, 5, 6 feet of water. And when you're talking southern Minnesota or you're talking other parts of the Walleye Belt, a lot of times they're just off that first break, maybe as deep as 15 feet of water. But whether you're fishing extremely shallow like that or slightly deeper, jigs are really the perfect delivery method for so many different kinds of presentations. So we'll spend some time focusing on jigs.
Like Joel said, we're gonna be talking about jig fishing coming up next. Here's a few tips from Joel on how to jig up some springtime walleyes.
So one of the keys to actually fishing a jig and fishing it well is to maintain good contact with bottom. And all that sounds very easy, but there's a lot that you have to think about and a lot that you have to do. And right now we've got a little bit of a wind, and if I was fishing walleyes right now, I would pitch it out and make sure that I'm pitching either downwind or directly upwind. I prefer downwind when possible, and it's also nice because, hey, if you got wind piling into a shoreline, that can make it nice, right, for fish and attracting them in there, but also for fishing it. So what you want to do is you want to get contact with bottom. That's your first step. Get there. Make sure that you're not fishing across the wind, so there's no bow put in your line. If you have a big bow in your line, if you're fishing across the wind, it's going to rob your ability to detect bites and then also set the hook. So making sure that your line is straight is a big key. From there, you want to work the jig slowly, especially when we're talking opener walleyes. People overwork their jigs quite often, and it's pretty amazing. We're not going for reaction strikes here for fishing live bait and jigs. It's cooler water temperatures usually. We're not revved up for the summer quite yet. You need to match the conditions at hand. So sometimes just small pops, just working the rod ever so slightly and hopping that bait along bottom is the ticket. Another way to do it, a lot of times I just reel up slack, bury the rod up against me, and then just slowly pull. And when I say pull, I mean basically drag that jig across bottom. In a good jig fishing scenario, you have such good contact with the bottom, you're actually mapping the lake bottom. You're actually feeling where the rocks are, where I hit a patch of gravel, did it turn into sand or muck. With a quality rod, good hard line, the right weight jig, casting downwind, all of those things are possible, and all of them are gonna help you catch more fish.
Now, if you're a hardcore jig angler, you know that there's a bunch of different tools that you might potentially want to utilize when you're out chasing walleyes during the springtime period. And that's the exact topic that Joel is going to be covering next. He's going to break down a few of his go-to walleye jigs for this springtime opener period.
So when it comes to jigs, Northland makes so many styles, colors, shapes, sizes, and it can be a little bit confusing as to which way to turn. And I think it's really hard to go wrong with anything from the Fireball series. That Fireball jig has just been a standard for so many different years, and one of the reasons is it's a great way to deliver live bait. You can, kind of thread this into a fathead's mouth, even a larger shiner. So many people will lip hook those or thread it into the mouth. And then there's a little spot right here you can actually put a stinger hook on, attach it, and if you've got short striking walleyes, you've got the ability to be able to bury that hook kind of at the tail of the minnow, such that when a walleye grabs on, you're gonna sting him. And that's the way that the Fireball jig has remained such a versatile, strong choice when it comes to opening up. And you know, you're fishing a lot of 16th ounce sizes, 8th ounce sizes, maybe even up to a quarter if you're fishing slightly deeper water. But the Fireball roundhead jig in all of its colors, like UV and this one, have just been so important to so many people in a lot of different openers. And another variation of the Fireball that I'll probably be pitching over at Walleye Opener is this long shank Fireball jig. Now, long shank jigs are really nice because, hey, we're fishing quite often with jigs and shiners. Early season, that's so often what those walleyes are gonna prefer. But when you've got a longer minnow without a hook towards the back part of it, you have that same issue, that short striking. So being able to either loop this through the gill plate and back up through the meat of the fish, or simply thread it on that minnow, it makes such a difference when that hook is positioned back a little further. And I don't care if it's walleyes, whatever species that tend to be short striking, a long shank Fireball jig is a great solution whenever you're using live bait. You know, another one when I think live bait, I think specifically on rivers, this deep V bucktail. The deep V is kind of a new bait. You can kind of see it's got that V shape. It helps track in the water very well. It's got a slightly different fall rate. And I use these a lot with live bait on the river system. But I also know guys that love pitching the shallow with plastics. And I tell you, you know, opener can be fine to use plastics if you've got some of that warmer water. But, you know, it works well for live bait too. And that's something to remember. All right. And then you've got the Whistler jig. Now this is a great jig in heavy cover, turbid conditions, when a little bit of sound, a little bit of spin, vibration, action, noise can draw fish to you. So this one's a great one to open up with on some of the big waters. If it's a little bit dark and murky and it's, you know, it's not quite clear conditions, I really like just kind of popping this thing and letting that propeller do its work. And you can do it with live bait, but it also works really great with plastics, just a small plastic tail as well. And speaking of plastics, this deep V jig, I swear to God, it's just made for plastics. You've got a wonderful wire keeper on there. You've got the fact that it's got that V shape to it, that kind of keel on the base of the jig head itself. It's gonna help it track so well, even with plastics on. Gonna keep it nice, tried and true. And again, with that keeper, sharp hook, it's made for throwing plastics. So if you're opening up in the southern portions of the Walleye Belt and you've got some warmer water temperatures, fish shallow, you wanna throw some plastics, I'd be looking for this deep V jig to pair up with your plastics.
Now obviously having the right jig for the job is critical, you know, whether it's a long shank, short shank, hair, you name it. But what's also critical is having the correct rod, reel, line setup so that not only can you present the bait the way that you want to, but you can also feel the bites that you happen to be getting. So next up, Joel's gonna be talking about that exact topic, and he's gonna talk about why it's important to use the right gear for the presentation that you have at hand.
So for fishing with a jig, it really behooves you to have a high quality carbon fiber rod, and not just any rod. I prefer something in the 6.5 foot lengths all the way up to 7, and a specific power and action. We're talking powers. I really like a medium light power for some of the lighter jigs, 16th ounce, 8th ounce. We work up above 8th ounce, I'll move up to a medium. And power is important, but action is probably even more important. Now action is just the deflection and where that happens in relation to the tip of the rod. An extra fast action like on this rod is crucial to fishing a jig well, because extra fast actions allow you to have tons of control over the bait. They flex just at the tip, so you've got a lot of sensitivity, a lot of feel. You can still fling the bait very well, but as soon as you feel a bite, the fish isn't going to feel you, because the tip of the rod is going to give a little bit. Yet when you set the hook, you go to backbone much quicker. So with just the slightest flick of the wrist, you can automatically get into backbone, and that's really important. So no matter what you choose for a rod, an extra fast action is great. As for reel and line, you just want to match up the reel, something very lightweight, and pair it up to the rod that you're fishing. I prefer braid when fishing jigs, but I don't tie braid all the way through to the jig head in all but the murkiest environments. Most often, just like I've got now, there's just a little bit of fluorocarbon. I'll tie in a 4 to 6 foot lead or somewhere in there, depending on the length of the rod. And I really feel that fluorocarbon helps that jig work better because it's a little bit stiffer. And obviously it's translucent, so you're not going to be able to have issues with fish seeing the hard line like you would in clear water. So that's my setup for jig fishing. That's how I get rigged up and ready. I think it'll help you catch more fish.
All right, now we've been talking about jigs like the last 11 minutes or so, but now we're gonna change gears and talk about another category of baits that you don't wanna overlook during this springtime period, and that is crankbaits.
And I guess I'll close out by talking a little bit about crankbaits. We can't forget them on opener. I think so many of us write off active baits, active presentations, because hey, quite often if the walleye opener is cold, if it's chilly, if the weather's poor, you're not going to get bit as easily on active presentations. Now that said, I've had crankbaits work wonders on a number of different bodies of water, especially down in the southern part of Minnesota. But even in the north, I actually a couple of years ago had an opener where we pulled crankbaits and we literally drove circles around other boats that were vertically jigging them. And yeah, in 2 boats, I think we had multiple limits in underneath an hour. So it can be fast action with crankbaits. And the 2 I really want to talk about are the Rumble series from Northland, both of them. But the Rumble Shiner would be the first one I would try to pull. Especially in the 7 size, it's going to pull in those depths that you're so often going to see those walleyes at. In that 5 foot of water range, anywhere from 4 to 6, 7 foot. Very effective bait for being able to pull through those schools of fish that are up there. And if they're up there and they're following spot tail shiners or other bait migrations, that Rumble Shiner is just perfect. It's a spitting image, it's a dead match. Now the Rumble Shad has a slightly different wiggle. It's a little bit tighter, and this one is a great bait for maybe the southern portions of the state. Pulling off of the first breaks, we start to get a little bit deeper up towards that 10-foot level of water. And both of them are balsa, and balsa is just such a good, buoyant, natural-looking bait in the water. And these baits are tough. They've got a system here where there's actually wire molded in and through the baits themselves, heat compression molded. You've got a lot of strength and power in these baits if you're pulling them up against rocks or heavy cover. So at the end of the day, the Rumble Shiner, the Rumble Shad, they're going to be great opener baits for you if other things aren't working, if fish are scattered, if fish are fairly aggressive but completely strewn across a large piece of structure. Cranking is the way I would go. Go ahead, try it. You might be surprised how well it works. You might be pulling crankbaits every opener from here forward.
Now, whether you're going to be fishing in Minnesota this upcoming weekend, or you fish in any of the surrounding states, or anywhere where there happens to be walleyes, hopefully you're able to pick up a few good tips, good springtime walleye fishing tips that'll help you put a few more walleyes in the net this spring. And if you did happen to learn something in this video, make sure to hit that little red subscribe button down below, because we have a lot more awesome multi-species content coming this spring.